It was supposed to be a dream, a place we could call ours. La Belle Cuisine wasn't just a restaurant, it was everything we'd worked for. From the late nights when we scrubbed down the counters, to the endless hours of tastings and planning, every inch of that place carried a piece of us. It started as a small bistro we opened after Emily and I saved up for years. Nothing fancy, just a cozy spot with good food and a strong drink menu. We wanted to make it in the world of fine dining, and we did. The city eventually took notice. Over the years, the place became an institution. Michelin stars, awards, articles in food magazines. La Belle Cuisine became the go-to for anyone looking to indulge in the finest dishes. We built that reputation together, Emily and me. She was the front of house. Charming, poised, always a step ahead with customer relations. I was the back-of-house guy, the one in the kitchen, making sure everything was perfect, always a little more intense than she was, but we balanced each other. But somewhere along the line, I stopped feeling like I was part of the picture. Emily had changed. And it wasn't just the haircuts or the clothes. She became more distant, colder somehow. She'd still put on the perfect act in front of the customers, but behind closed doors, things were different. The late nights at the restaurant became more frequent, and she started spending less time at home. I used to brush it off, thinking it was just the stress of running a high-end business, but deep down, I felt something was off. Then, one night, things came to a head. I had always trusted her, never even considered the possibility of betrayal. But everything changed when I found the first text. I don't know why I was looking through her phone that night. Maybe I was trying to find a reason to feel better, like some misplaced hope that maybe I was just imagining things. But what I found wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a gut punch I'll never forget. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through some restaurant reviews on my phone when Emily's phone buzzed on the counter. It was late, around 1 a.m. She'd been holed up in her office all evening, working on God knows what. She had a habit of turning her phone face down when she was distracted, but that night, for some reason, I decided to glance at it. It was a text from Jason. Jason, you still good for tomorrow night? I've been thinking about what you said. I'll make sure it's perfect. My stomach twisted. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. Jason, the head chef at La Belle Cuisine. The guy who was always in the kitchen, always right there, helping with things. I'd been picking up on their tension for months. Little glances exchanged when Emily thought I wasn't looking, the way they worked too well together, a little too close. I stood there frozen for a moment. I almost didn't want to open it, but the curiosity ate at me. So, I slid open the conversation thread. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just a couple of texts. They had been texting back and forth for months. Casual messages at first, dinner plans, quick work updates. But then, as time went on, they became more intimate. Emily, I miss you. Can't wait to be with you tonight. Everything will fall into place soon. I felt sick to my stomach. I put the phone down, but my hands were shaking. The world suddenly felt like it was tilting, spinning out of control. I had spent years building this restaurant with her, fighting for every inch of success, and here she was, sneaking around with Jason. Worse, she was talking about falling into place. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, the weight of it settling in. It wasn't just some fling. She was planning something. I could feel it. I had no idea how deep this went yet, but I knew enough to know that everything I thought I knew about our marriage was a lie. I tried to keep my emotions in check when she came downstairs later. My head was racing, but I played it cool. I was calm when I asked, "Who's Jason?" Emily froze for a second, just a flicker of hesitation, but she quickly recovered. She looked me straight in the eyes and smiled. "What's this about?" she asked, putting on that innocent tone, the one she knew always disarmed me. I held up the phone. "Your texts. What's going on?" Her face went pale, but she laughed it off. "Oh, Tom, you're overreacting. Jason and we've been working together closely, that's all. You know how this business is." She tried to brush it off like it was nothing, but there was something in her eyes, like she knew she was caught but couldn't admit it yet. "I don't think that's all it is," I said, trying to steady my voice, though it was barely working. I could feel the hurt and anger rising up inside me, like a tidal wave, but I held it back. "You're texting him like you're more than just business partners." Her response was a cold laugh. "Oh, come on, Tom. You're being dramatic. Don't make a scene over nothing." She stepped closer to me, reached out like she was going to touch my arm, but I pulled back. "You know how much pressure I'm under, how much I've been doing for this place. This restaurant. It's everything to me. You're Just what? I cut her off, the anger I'd been holding back now rising to the surface. What am I, Emily? Just your husband? Just the guy who's been doing everything while you're off with him. She gave me that look, the one that said, "You're not getting it, but I'm going to let you think you are." Don't be ridiculous, Tom. We're fine. You're overthinking this. We're partners, okay? I need him for the restaurant. It's not like you think. I didn't believe her, not for a second. But I was trying to hold it together. I wanted to hear her say it, to admit it, but I knew I wouldn't get the truth from her. Not that night. Not when she was still so damn good at twisting things around. I didn't push her further. I didn't need to. I already knew what I needed to know. I'd caught her in a lie. Now, it was just a matter of seeing how deep this went. And believe me, it was deep. I couldn't let it go. The texts were one thing, but something about the way Emily had reacted, so dismissive, like she was above any kind of explanation, left me feeling more unsettled than ever. I had to dig deeper. I started paying closer attention to the details at work, things I had once taken for granted. Emily's behavior had always been easy to ignore because we had a routine. She'd handle the front of the house, and I'd be in the kitchen, keeping everything running smoothly. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was making moves I wasn't aware of. I began noticing small shifts in how she was making decisions about the restaurant. She started spending more time with Jason, making him the go-to person for everything related to the kitchen. She'd let him handle things that used to be my responsibility, like approving menu changes or talking to suppliers. It wasn't just a slight change, it was a deliberate shift. Jason was becoming the face of La Belle Cuisine, not me. Then came the day I overheard them talking in the back office. I had come in early, hoping to catch up on some prep work before the lunch rush. But as I walked past the office, I stopped when I heard their voices. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the door was cracked open, and I couldn't help myself. Emily, once we get everything in place, it'll be just a formality. I'll transfer the shares, and it'll be yours. Just keep doing what you're doing. Jason, and Tom. His voice was low, cautious. Emily, he won't know what hit him. You just have to keep pushing him out, making him think everything's fine. He trusts me too much. This will be easy. I almost stumbled when I heard that. I had to force myself to breathe. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to take everything. La Belle Cuisine, the restaurant I'd poured my blood, sweat, and tears into, she was giving it to him. And she was doing it behind my back, pretending like everything was fine. I thought I was going to explode right then and there. The betrayal was gut-wrenching, but the part about the shares, that was the final nail in the coffin. Emily wasn't just being unfaithful emotionally. She was scheming to take ownership of the business. I needed proof. I had to know how far this had gone, and I wasn't going to sit by and let her destroy everything we'd built. So, I started looking through the financial documents. They were kept in the safe in the back office. At first, I just wanted to confirm what I'd overheard. But when I pulled out the files and started going through them, I found exactly what I was looking for. Paperwork showing that Emily had signed over a significant portion of the restaurant to Jason. It was all there, clear as day. She'd been doing it slowly, little by little, over the past few months. The shares were being transferred into Jason's name under the guise of business development and future planning. But in reality, it was a calculated move to wrest control from me. I was standing in the office, staring at those papers, feeling the world crumbling around me. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't breathe. She had been planning this for so long, using her charm and manipulation to get him involved, to make him believe he was entitled to something that wasn't his. And all the while, I was the fool, the husband who trusted her. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a betrayal of my heart. It was a betrayal of everything I had worked for. And I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to make a choice now. I could walk away, let her have everything, and try to rebuild my life from scratch, or I could fight back. And I'm not the kind of guy who walks away from a fight. The moment I saw those papers, I couldn't think straight. I just stared at the documents, my mind spinning. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. The affair, it hurt, but I could understand it, in a way. People make mistakes. But this was calculated. This wasn't just infidelity. This was her ripping everything we'd worked for out of my hands. I went home that night, and for the first time in months, I didn't even want to look at Emily. I felt like a stranger in my own house. She was sitting at the kitchen table, reading through some emails for the restaurant, her face bathed in the soft light of the lamp. She looked normal, like nothing had changed. But I was no longer that guy. The one who blindly trusted her, the one who believed she was on my side. The truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't pretend anymore. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I meant it to be. I know about the shares. I know what you've been doing with Jason. Emily looked up, the same practiced smile on her lips. What are you talking about? She asked, feigning innocence. But I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. You think I'm stupid? I snapped, feeling the anger boil over. You've been moving everything behind my back, everything we built, and handing it over to him. Jason. Really? She stood up slowly, as if she was calculating her next move. Tom, you don't understand. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I was just trying to plan for the future. Jason is, well, he's more qualified to handle the business side of things. You've been distracted lately. I could hear the excuses piling up, each one more ridiculous than the last. But what struck me was how calm she sounded. How she wasn't even bothered by being caught. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just something she was apologizing for. She was justifying it. You've been distracted? I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Is that what this is about? You've been running around behind my back, sleeping with him and giving him everything I've worked for, and it's because I've been distracted? You're unbelievable. Her face twisted, and she leaned in. Don't make this about you, Tom. You've been stuck in that kitchen, obsessed with the food and the critics, and I've been here, working with Jason to keep this place running. You don't get it. You never have. I was shaking now, trying to keep myself composed, but I could feel my chest tightening. I get it, Emily. I get that you've been sleeping with him, and you've been planning to take the whole damn restaurant from me. That's what I get. She threw her hands up, exasperated. You're not hearing me. I'm doing what's best for us. For the restaurant. Can't you see that? I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tear everything down. But there was something worse than the anger now. It was the sadness, the realization that my whole life, my whole trust in her, had been a lie. She wasn't just breaking my heart. She was shattering everything we'd built together. I turned and walked out. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't look at her. I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. Just numb. My mind was racing, going through the motions, trying to process what had happened. The next few days were a blur. I went into the restaurant like nothing had changed. I worked harder, trying to bury the hurt, but every step felt heavier. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It wasn't just her lying to me. It was the realization that I was being replaced, not just as her husband, but as the owner of La Belle Cuisine. I had no idea what she was telling Jason or how far this had gone, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything I'd built. I needed a plan. I needed to fight back. I couldn't just sit back and let her take everything without a fight. The betrayal was too much. She wasn't just having an affair. She was trying to steal my entire life, everything I'd worked for. La Belle Cuisine wasn't just a restaurant. It was my legacy, my future. And she was handing it over to him like it was a business deal. The problem was, I couldn't just walk into the restaurant and start throwing punches, metaphorically or literally. If I confronted her head-on, I knew she'd just lie her way out of it again. She was too good at that, too practiced. I needed to take a different approach, one where I stayed in control and made her see that I wasn't the naive fool she thought I was. The first step was simple. I needed to disrupt the kitchen. Jason was the golden boy now. Emily had made sure of that. She had him running the kitchen, approving dishes, giving him more power than he deserved. The guy wasn't a bad chef, but he wasn't anywhere near as talented as he thought he was. I had always been the one who knew the ins and outs of La Belle Cuisine. I had built the reputation. Jason was just the loud, charismatic chef who thought he was untouchable. So, I started manipulating things behind the scenes. It wasn't difficult to do. Over the next few weeks, I planted seeds of doubt among the kitchen staff. I told them things weren't running smoothly, that Jason had been changing recipes and making decisions without consulting me. I wasn't directly sabotaging anything, but I was feeding them enough misinformation that things began to get sloppy. Little mistakes here and there, dishes coming out not as good as they used to, the quality slipping. And when the food critics started noticing, I made sure they got all the right information. I might have been angry, but I wasn't stupid. I knew the critics and food bloggers paid attention to the smallest details. If the reviews started tanking, If the quality of the dishes went downhill, it wouldn't just hurt the restaurant, it would destroy Jason's credibility. Emily's too. At first, it was subtle. The customers didn't notice right away, but I could feel it. The staff was starting to doubt themselves, Jason's leadership, and the restaurant's once unshakable reputation. The dishes weren't as consistent as they used to be. The sous chefs began to wonder what was going on. The headwaiter came to me a few times, asking questions about recipe changes or the quality of ingredients. They were starting to notice the cracks, too. But I didn't stop there. I knew that if I really wanted to hurt them, I had to get the whole city talking. So, I started leaking rumors. I didn't do it directly, of course. But I had my ways. I'd casually mention things to the right people, people who had connections to the press, to food critics. I made sure that they knew about Emily's affair with Jason. The whispers started spreading, little by little, and soon, the whole city knew. There were murmurs at the bars, whispers at other restaurants, and reporters started showing up at La Belle Cuisine just to see what was going on. The scandal was in the air, and it wasn't long before the press picked up on it. They called it an affair behind the scenes, and then they dug into the business side. The rumors about the ownership transfers were spreading like wildfire. The more I pushed, the more it felt like the walls were closing in on Emily and Jason. They had no idea what was coming, but I could already see the cracks in their facade. I was careful, though. I never got too direct with anything. I was playing the long game, and I knew that once the reputation started to sour, they wouldn't be able to control the damage. La Belle Cuisine was a household name, but it wasn't untouchable. The moment the critics started noticing that something was off, the entire house of cards would start to fall. I'd watched Emily play her games for too long. She thought she was the one in control, pulling the strings. But she had no idea who she was dealing with now. The more I pushed, the more I saw the cracks in Emily's perfect little world begin to widen. I wasn't going to give her the luxury of an easy escape. I wasn't going to let her run off with Jason and La Belle Cuisine like nothing had happened. No. She had to pay for what she'd done. And if I had to burn everything down to make that happen, so be it. The rumors I planted were starting to pick up momentum. People were talking. Customers who used to rave about the food were now questioning the quality. The critics were picking up on something too, even if they didn't know exactly what. There was a change in the air. The place that had once been the destination for fine dining in the city was suddenly slipping. I remember the first time I saw the headline, La Belle Cuisine's fall from grace. Is the affair behind the decline? It was like a shot to the chest. I could feel the weight of it, the public humiliation, but it was also sweet, because I knew Emily couldn't control it anymore. The whispers in the press weren't just about the affair anymore. They were about the business. They started asking questions about the ownership structure, how Jason was suddenly making all the decisions. The timing was too perfect. They didn't know the full story, not yet, but the damage was done. I didn't stop there. Once the media had the scent, I made sure to fuel the fire. I wasn't being subtle about it. I went to some of the reporters I knew, the ones who covered the restaurant scene, and casually dropped little pieces of information. I'd tell them about the shady financial transfers, how Emily had been making all these decisions without consulting me, how Jason had suddenly appeared as the co-owner of the place, though no one had ever formally introduced him as such. The media ate it up. Emily tried to control the narrative. She started doing damage control interviews, calling it all a misunderstanding. There's no affair, she insisted, just business restructuring. But she didn't count on the backlash. The more she denied it, the worse it got. The public wasn't buying her act anymore. Then came the reviews. They had always been stellar, but now, food critics started to notice the difference. The quality of the dishes wasn't consistent. Some praised the food, others barely acknowledged it. Even the regulars were starting to comment on how the menu seemed to change too often, like they were trying too hard to stay relevant. The first bad review from a top critic hit me like a wave. It was subtle, but the tone was unmistakable. Once a beacon of culinary perfection, La Belle Cuisine now seems to be struggling with identity. The menu, while ambitious, often falls short of expectations. It seems as though the restaurant is at a crossroads, unsure of where it's going. I knew exactly what that meant. That was the beginning of the end. The rest of the critics followed suit. They didn't even need to know about the affair. They didn't need to know about the secret deals, the transfers. All they needed was a reason to doubt, and once they started doubting, it spread like wildfire. Emily didn't know what hit her. She had always been in control of the public's perception of of La Belle Cuisine. Now, it was slipping away from her. She was scrambling to keep the staff in line, to keep up appearances. But the pressure was mounting. The restaurant was in freefall, and she was powerless to stop it. The investors were starting to get nervous. That's when I started hearing it from the back of the house. The kitchen staff, the waiters, the suppliers, all of them were starting to ask questions. What was going on with the restaurant? Why was Jason making decisions that were clearly out of his depth? Why was Emily acting so strange? And with every question, the damage spread further. The walls were closing in, and Emily was running out of ways to keep everything together. I was watching it all happen from the sidelines, feeling a sick satisfaction. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd underestimated me. The more she tried to cover up her lies, the more they fell apart. But this was just the beginning. The real blow was still to come. It didn't take long for the damage to snowball. La Belle Cuisine was known for consistency, excellence, and a personal touch that kept regulars coming back. But as the whispers turned into full-blown rumors, the cracks I had set in motion started to widen. And once the critics started digging, there was no going back. Emily tried everything to salvage it. She called emergency meetings with the staff, reworked the menu, and even brought in new suppliers to make everything fresh. But nothing worked. Jason's incompetence started to show. He couldn't keep the kitchen running smoothly, and the dishes that used to wow our customers were now underwhelming at best. Worse, the staff began to realize the truth. The sous chef started asking why they were following Jason's orders when they knew he wasn't qualified to make the decisions. The waiters started questioning the changes in the dining experience. The atmosphere wasn't the same. The food wasn't the same. And customers noticed. I wasn't even trying to fix things at this point. I was sitting back, watching the fallout unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. Every failed attempt to salvage the restaurant, every awkward interview Emily gave to the press, was a small victory for me. It wasn't just that I wanted to ruin her business. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to realize what she'd lost, what she'd thrown away for Jason. Then came the investors. The ones who had always kept the restaurant afloat. I'd known for a while that they'd been growing nervous, but when I overheard a conversation between Emily and one of them, I could see the writing on the wall. The investors were starting to pull out. They were losing confidence in the restaurant and in Emily's ability to manage it. At the same time, the rumors about the affair were no longer whispers. They were facts. The media picked up on the financial irregularities, the changes in ownership, and Emily's and Jason's involvement. The press was relentless. They painted Emily and Jason as a power-hungry couple, willing to sacrifice anything, even the very foundation of La Belle Cuisine, to get what they wanted. One night, after a particularly disastrous evening service, I saw Emily in the office. She was pacing, holding her phone tightly in her hand, her face flushed with frustration. Jason was supposed to be handling the kitchen, but the customers were starting to leave early. Reviews were starting to mention the lackluster experience. Investors were pulling their money out. Emily had to know the end was near. I could have walked away. I could have let her figure it out herself, let her sink under the weight of her lies and betrayal. But I wasn't done yet. She still needed to see the full scope of what she had done. I had a choice. I could go home, continue with my life, or I could do what I had been planning all along, push her into the final corner, where there was no escape. So, I made my move. The final move came when I learned about a high-stakes meeting Emily had been setting up with a group of potential investors. This was the last chance to save the restaurant, or at least salvage some of its value. The pressure was on. She was pulling out all the stops. She and Jason had been meeting in secret, going over proposals, trying to get new investors to inject cash into the sinking ship. But what they didn't know was that I was already ahead of them. I'd been watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was at this meeting. I found out about it a couple of days before. I'd been keeping tabs, making sure I knew where they'd be, what they'd be talking about. Emily had been telling the investors that La Belle Cuisine was still the shining star of the city, that the critics' reviews were just temporary setbacks. She was feeding them lies, but I knew the truth. I knew they were about to make a huge mistake, investing in a sinking ship, putting their money into a restaurant that was falling apart at the seams. I wasn't going to let them do that. I couldn't. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Emily. It was about protecting everything I'd worked for, everything I had left. I showed up uninvited, of course. I knew exactly when the meeting was scheduled, and I slipped in through the back entrance. The moment I walked into that conference room, I could see the surprise in Emily's face. The investors were there, seated around the table, all looking at me like I'd just walked in off the street. But Emily! She froze. For a split second, I saw that look of panic in her eyes. You, she spat, trying to cover her shock. What the hell are you doing here? This is a private meeting. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the tension build, watching as the investors exchanged awkward glances. Then, I turned to them and spoke, my voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm here to make sure you know exactly what you're investing in, I said, making sure to address the room. This isn't just about a restaurant anymore. This is about fraud. About deception. About how my wife and your potential new partner Jason have been lying to you all. The room went dead silent. Emily tried to recover, but I could see the panic in her face now. She was slipping. Tom, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself, she said, her voice shaking. But I wasn't listening. I pulled out a stack of documents from my bag, the ones I'd been keeping hidden. You should know that Emily and Jason here have been siphoning off money from the restaurant. She's already signed over a portion of the business to him, without telling anyone. And those future plans she's been promising you? They're nothing but lies. The investors were starting to look uneasy now. They glanced at each other, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. Jason, sitting across the table, was starting to sweat. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, the confidence drained from his face. You're accusing us of, Jason started, but I cut him off. Accusing? I'm showing you the truth. I slammed the papers down on the table. The room was dead silent now, everyone staring at the documents I had just revealed. Papers showing the transfers of shares to Jason, unauthorized financial documents proving Emily's involvement in these shady dealings. This is how your partners have been running the show. They've been plotting behind your backs to steal what's rightfully mine, and now they want to take your money too. Do you really want to throw your hard-earned cash into this sinking ship? The investors were murmuring now, looking from me to Emily, then back to the documents. I could see the doubt creeping into their minds. They didn't trust her anymore. They couldn't. Emily's perfect act was starting to crumble, and she knew it. She stood up, but I wasn't done yet. Oh, and by the way, I added, turning to face her, La Belle Cuisine is done. I'm shutting it down. For good. The room went completely still. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Jason was looking at her now, his face full of confusion and fear. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to get out of this mess. I'm closing it down, Emily, I repeated. You're not taking this from me. You and Jason can find something else to ruin. The investors were already gathering their things, murmuring among themselves. They were done. They were out. Emily and Jason's dream of taking over La Belle Cuisine was over. And as the room began to empty, I could feel that bitter satisfaction. The feeling of power, of control, that I hadn't felt in so long. It was done. And they were finished. The fallout was immediate. I could almost taste the panic in the air as the investors filed out of the meeting, their faces pale, their decisions already made. Emily stood there, frozen, trying to muster some last-ditch defense, but it was over. The damage had been done, and no words were going to undo it. I watched as she fumbled for something to say. Tom, please, she said, her voice shaking now, barely audible. You don't know what you're doing. You can't just. But I didn't let her finish. I stepped closer, my anger a quiet storm now, settling into something much colder. It's too late for that, Emily. You've already ruined everything. The restaurant, the investors, me. You did this. And now you're going to watch it all burn down because of your greed. I turned to Jason, who was still sitting there, looking like a lost puppy. His hands were shaking. You're done too, I said. You're out of the business. Don't even think about trying to pull some strings to save your career. I've already made sure of that. The look of sheer disbelief on his face was almost satisfying. He had thought he was untouchable, that nothing could bring him down from his shiny pedestal. But here he was, caught in the fallout of his own ambitions. No one cared about his culinary talents now. The press had already turned on him, and soon enough, he'd be blacklisted from the entire industry. His career, like Emily's reputation, would be gone. I didn't even have to say another word. I knew they were both done. But there was one final blow I had to land. I turned back to Emily, who was still trying to pull herself together, but her composure was slipping. She was starting to crack, the mask of control she had worn for so long falling apart. She couldn't lie her way out of this anymore. I'm closing it, Emily, I repeated, my voice cold, devoid of any sympathy. All of it. La Belle Cuisine is done. You and Jason can try to find something else, but you'll never rebuild what you destroyed. Not without me. The look on her face was the worst part. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was humiliated. All that power she thought she had, all the lies she had fed to everyone, it was crumbling, and she was powerless to stop it. The staff started to filter in, sensing something was off. I could see their confused faces as they looked between Emily, Jason, and me. But I knew the truth was out now, and they'd all see it too. The loyal ones would scatter. The rest would take whatever job they could find. But La Belle Cuisine, the restaurant they had all worked so hard to make famous, was finished. I turned to leave, but Emily tried one last desperate move. "Tom, please," she called out, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. I was just trying to make things work. We can fix this. We can." But I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I was done. The restaurant was done. And whatever future she had with Jason was done too. The next few weeks were a blur. There were meetings with lawyers, phone calls, and a flood of press attention. The city couldn't stop talking about La Belle Cuisine's sudden collapse. It was the story of the year. The affair, the secret ownership transfers, the financial chaos, it all came out, and Emily and Jason's reputations were irreparably tarnished. The restaurant's closure hit the headlines hard, but not in the way Emily had expected. Instead of the sorrow and sadness she had hoped for, the city turned on her. La Belle Cuisine was gone, but in its place, there was nothing but scandal and betrayal. The press had a field day. And Jason, the once promising chef who had dreamed of taking over the city's top restaurant, he was left with nothing. He was banned from every major restaurant and culinary event in the city, blacklisted from the industry that had once adored him. Emily tried to salvage something. She tried to throw herself into other business ventures, other ideas, but it was all too late. The world had seen who she really was, and no amount of spin could change it. As for me, I walked away with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not the kind that felt like victory, but something colder, deeper. Something that felt more like justice. They didn't just lose a restaurant. They lost their place in the world. And I was the one who made sure of it. It's strange, you know. You think you'll feel this rush of triumph when you bring someone down, especially when they've destroyed everything you cared about. But when it happens, when you've finally seen them broken, there's no victory. Just a bitter emptiness. I walked away from La Belle Cuisine in the end. The press covered it like a circus. Headlines about betrayal, deceit, and the dramatic downfall of one of the city's top restaurants. People talked. People judged. But the worst part, it didn't matter. The restaurant was gone. The dream we'd built was nothing more than a shell of what it used to be. Emily tried, but there was no saving her. She went into damage control mode at first, calling every former investor, trying to rebuild relationships with potential partners, scrambling to salvage her image. But no one bought it. Not anymore. The media had turned on her, and every attempt she made to distance herself from Jason only highlighted how deep her betrayal ran. She lost everything. La Belle Cuisine. Her reputation. Her marriage. And as for Jason, the press had a field day with him. He was banned from every major restaurant event in the city, blacklisted from the culinary world he thought he could conquer. His career, which had seemed so promising just a few months ago, evaporated like smoke in the wind. No one wanted him anymore. Not after the affair, not after the financial scandals, not after everything that came to light. The last time I saw Emily was at a small cafe near the old restaurant. I hadn't planned to run into her, but there she was, sitting alone, nursing a drink. She saw me from across the room, and for a moment, I thought she might come over, try to apologize, make one last attempt at winning back some of what she'd lost. But she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, staring into her drink, looking lost. A far cry from the confident woman I'd once known, the one who'd always had an answer for everything. Now, she was just broken. And I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't walk over to her. I didn't say a word. I just left. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need any more explanations. Everything had already been said. She had made her choices, and so had I. The restaurant was gone. The legacy we'd built, gone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't get everything back. I didn't get my family, my marriage, or my trust in people. But I did get something. A lesson. A lesson that sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, things fall apart. But sometimes, when they do, you have to let them. And sometimes, it's the only way to truly free yourself. I'm not a hero. I didn't save the day. But in the end, I made sure she didn't take me down with her. And that, for what it's worth, felt like enough.